The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as J.D. Vance leaned into his microphone, smirking. "I'm just not sure Ms. Crockett's academic background qualifies her to weigh in here." The audience stirred, a few gasps escaping. Jasmine Crockett straightened her back, calm but coiled. She didn't flinch. Her eyes locked onto his. But it wasn't her who responded first. It was someone from the back of the chamber rising with quiet authority. The figure stood tall, gray-haired, dressed simply but exuding gravitas. "Excuse me," he said clearly. "I believe I taught Ms. Crockett constitutional law at the University of Houston." A hush fell across the room. J.D. Vance paused, clearly not expecting a third party to enter the fray. Crockett's lips curled into a subtle smile. The man walked slowly toward the front, eyes never leaving J.D. Vance's. "I'm Professor Harold L. Tyson, 37 years in legal academia. J.D., you were in my first-year seminars at Yale Law. You barely passed." The crowd reacted, a stifled laugh here, a raised eyebrow there. Vance's face twitched. He opened his mouth to respond, but Professor Tyson raised a hand. "I'm not here to humiliate, just to correct the record." "Jasmine Crockett was one of the sharpest students I've ever taught," Tyson continued. "She didn't just memorize precedent, she challenged it. She asked hard questions. She made law better." Cameras panned toward Jasmine, who remained composed. The air in the room thickened with respect, shifting dramatically from moments earlier. Vance leaned back, visibly rattled. The judge cleared his throat, unsure whether to intervene. Tyson looked at him calmly. "Your Honor, with respect, I believe integrity requires defense when credentials are attacked, not in the abstract, but by those with vested political intent." The judge nodded once, signaling him to continue. Vance looked like he wanted to disappear into the bench. Tyson turned back to Vance. "You chose to diminish a black woman's achievements, not on merit, but by implication. You gambled the room. Would stay silent. You miscalculated." His tone was sharp but measured. A murmur of agreement rolled through the courtroom gallery. Crockett's fingers tapped lightly on the table, measured, patient, precise. Vance leaned forward, voice low. "Professor, I'm just saying credentials matter." "They do," Tyson interrupted, "which is why I suggest you revisit your own." There was a silence that didn't ask for permission. It demanded reflection. Crockett finally spoke. "I've never needed anyone to validate me, but today I'm glad someone chose to remind this room of the facts." Applause was not allowed in federal proceedings, but it came anyway. Subtle nods, smiles, and the unmistakable sound of respect. Vance's eyes darted toward the media row where cameras were already capturing the moment. His face, so often smug in hearings, now held something new. Uncertainty. Aide whispered something into Vance's ear, likely suggesting damage control. He waved it off. Professor Tyson wasn't finished. "I taught thousands of students, J.D. You had a sharp tongue. Jasmine had a sharp mind. There's a difference." Crockett looked down briefly, as if remembering the long nights, the self-doubt, and the constant pressure to be perfect. She raised her head slowly, her voice clear. "I won't apologize for where I came from. I won't diminish where I went, and I certainly won't stay silent when I'm dragged for daring to speak truth." The judge remained motionless. Even he couldn't deny the weight of what had unfolded. Vance finally found his voice. "This isn't personal," he said, but no one seemed convinced. His usual confident tone had faded into something brittle. "It became personal," Crockett replied calmly, "the moment you discredited my education without facts, only arrogance." She wasn't angry. She was deliberate. She was surgical, and the room felt every word as a precise incision. "Professor," Tyson turned to leave but paused. "I didn't come here to spar. I came here because silence in the face of intellectual dishonesty is complicity." The judge cleared his throat again, but didn't object. J.D. Vance sank a little deeper into his chair, his earlier attack unraveling in real time. Crockett gently closed her folder, signaling she was finished speaking. For now. Outside the courtroom, reporters gathered in a frenzy. Inside, the energy had changed. Vance, normally smug and quick, was now slow and cautious. He avoided eye contact. His hands fidgeted under the table. Across from him, Jasmine sat with stillness born from experience. She didn't need to prove herself, but she had done so anyway, brilliantly. "I hope this body learns something today," she said, standing slowly. "Not about me, but about assumptions, about underestimation, about the weight of silence when injustice enters through a smirk." Her words weren't loud, but the message rang louder than any shout could. Several senators shifted uncomfortably in their seats, glancing around to gauge reactions. The hearing was supposed to continue, but everything had shifted. The judge whispered with a clerk. Cameras caught every breath, every twitch of unease. J.D. Vance finally scribbled a note and passed it to an aide. One phrase leaked later: "Let's walk this back." But it was too late. The moment had passed, and Jasmine Crockett had owned it. Reporters flooded social media with clips. Crockett claps back. Professor floors Vance. Historic moment in courtroom. Trending within minutes. But, back inside, Jasmine just gathered her things. She didn't gloat. She didn't celebrate. She nodded respectfully to the judge and walked toward the exit with calm, powerful composure. The gallery remained seated, as if holding their breath. Even those who'd been skeptical of her before now viewed her differently. Not because she had won a moment, but because she had shown what intellect, grace, and courage look like under pressure, and because someone dared to stand beside her when it counted. Professor Tyson followed her into the hall. "You didn't need me," he said quietly. She smiled. "No, but sometimes we need witnesses." They exchanged a brief nod before parting ways. J.D. Vance emerged moments later, flanked by aides. No words, no smiles, just a silent, tight-jawed walk past the cameras. In the days that followed, op-eds praised the exchange. "A lesson in humility," one read. "Jasmine Crockett redefines the standard." Even legal scholars weighed in, dissecting not just the law, but the cultural weight of what happened. It wasn't just about credentials, it was about history, and about who gets to speak. J.D. Vance's team tried to shift the narrative, but the footage didn't lie. The internet did what it does best: spread the truth, meme the misstep, and elevate the moment. Jasmine didn't issue a statement. She didn't need to. Her words in that room had already said everything, and they echoed far beyond those four walls. That moment became a lesson in more than law. It was a masterclass in poise. Students in law schools across the country played the video in classrooms. Professors used it as a real-world example of rhetorical power, of dignity under fire, and of how legacy is written, not handed. Meanwhile, Jasmine returned to her regular duties. She didn't change. She didn't need to. But the way people saw her had changed. Her inbox overflowed with thank you messages from young women, especially women of color. "You made us proud." "You showed them." "You reminded them we belong." In the chamber's next hearing, J.D. Vance walked in quieter, more reserved. His usual sharp tone was absent. When Jasmine entered, he didn't make eye contact. He didn't interrupt. He listened. Not because he agreed, but because he now understood. There are some rooms you don't own with arrogance. The judge later acknowledged the moment in a speech. Sometimes a courtroom becomes more than a place for law, it becomes a place for truth to stand tall. He didn't name names, but everyone knew who he meant. Even those who once dismissed Jasmine now held a quiet respect. The clip of Professor Tyson defending Jasmine reached over 5 million views. But his final comment was the one that echoed deepest. "You don't teach courage. You witness it." Jasmine had always known that. Her whole life had been a lesson in standing tall where others wanted her small. And while the news cycle moved on, as it always does, something stayed. In the chambers, in classrooms, in conversations. Jasmine Crockett's moment wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming space, and about reminding everyone that brilliance doesn't come from where you sit. It comes from who you are. That day, something subtle shifted in the corridors of power. One by one, the assumptions that had lingered too long were cracked open, and through the cracks, truth had spoken. Fiercely, elegantly, unapologetically. Jasmine had never asked for a spotlight, but she had lit up the room. As she walked out that day, someone from the gallery whispered, "Thank you." She turned, nodded once, and disappeared into the hallway. The cameras caught the door closing behind her. But the story didn't end there. It was just beginning, because for every courtroom like that one, there are 100 others. And for every voice like J.D. Vance's, there are louder echoes of dignity rising. Jasmine's name became more than a headline. It became a symbol. For the underestimated, the challenged, the dismissed. She didn't need validation, but she got it. Not because of who attacked her, but because of how she stood. That's the real power. Not to silence others, but to remind them why you're still standing. And Jasmine Crockett stood tall that day, for herself and for everyone who ever had to fight to be heard.